All right, this is Luke chapter 15. This is what it says. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he's found it, he'll joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he'll call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I've found my lost sheep." In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she'll call in her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. We have been talking about aspects of American culture. So we've been in a series now for probably 10 weeks. Aspects of American culture that if we misunderstand them, or if we sort of uncritically give ourselves to them, they can shape us in ways that are contrary to Jesus, right? All cultures have this ability. They have the ability to mimic the stuff of God, and they have the ability to sort of run contrary to the things of God. So we spent a number of weeks talking about the topic of progress, our sort of aimless pursuit of more. For the last 4 weeks, we've been talking about this notion of freedom. Right? There's no word more synonymously associated with American culture than freedom. And the way we typically understand freedom is the ability to do what we want. And that's an important kind of freedom. It's an important kind of freedom that a Christian person shouldn't just throw out as unimportant. Just not ultimate. That for the Christian person, the ultimate type of freedom is not the ability to do what we want, it's the capacity to do as we should. So you are freest as a human being when you are able to say no to the things you ought to say no to, and yes to the things that you ought to say yes to. So as a Christian person, you assume that there is a God and that God designed human life to work a certain way. The degree to which you are able to live into that design, you are a free person. So what we're trying to do is discuss disciplines, habits, practices that the Christian church offers to people to say, look, if engaged faithfully over time, these practices can shape you appropriately. They can shape you in the way of Christ. So we talked about, a couple weeks ago, we talked about this discipline of self-denial. Last week we talked about the discipline of planning. Thinking strategically about your life and how you use the time that God's given you. This morning, we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about money this morning. And if you're that person who's like, here we go again. Here we go again. Every time I come to church, they talk about money, okay? We're going to talk about money because money is like a direct link for most of us to this notion of freedom as the ability to do what we want, isn't it? I mean, think of all the things that you want to do that you don't do or can't do. Why? Because you just don't have enough money. If you had the money, like maybe, you're in a job right now and you like your job, but you don't love it. And if you could leave it, you would, but you can't because, you have to make a living, to pay for things. So you stay. But if you won the lottery tomorrow, you'd probably quit because you'd have enough money to do what you want. Okay? So we got to talk about money as it relates to this concept of freedom as the ability to do what we want versus the capacity to do as we should. Jesus is hanging out with people described as sinners, notorious sinners, although that word's not in the Greek, notorious sinners and tax collectors. And his association with these people bothers the religious leaders described as Pharisees and teachers of religious law. I don't have time to go into the difference between those groups, but you've got this one group over here described as sinners and tax collectors, and you've got a group over here described as essentially religious leaders. Jesus is hanging out with this group over here, and it bothers that group over there. Now, what you might not know is that these two respective groups have something in common. Both have forgotten what it means to take care of people. That for a Jew, the greatest command is to love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. Not to believe in God, not to fear God, not even to first and foremost obey God. The first command is to love God. It's such a simple question, but as you sit in church on a Sunday morning and you just ask yourself the question, do I love God? I mean, do I? Like, what is it about God that I love? I believe in God, or otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. Or at least I'm open to a belief in God. Do you love God? So for a first century Jew, the greatest command is to love God. God has loved me. I love God in return. And the way you measure that love, which is why these commands go together, is you measure your love, heart, mind, soul, and strength for God by the way you love your neighbor. So love of God is measured by love of neighbor. You say, yeah, Mike, I love God. I say, well, how do you know? You say, well, because I love my neighbor. If you say, no, Mike, I love God, and you don't love your neighbor, then I say, no, you don't. Regardless of what you say. That's how it works. Both of these groups, in their own way, had forgotten that to love God means to love their neighbor. So sinners and tax collectors, these people get lumped together, well, because they were wealthy. There's no other way to say it. And because of their wealth, they had sort of removed themselves from the common welfare. So God's vision for human community is that you and I think of each other as brothers and sisters, okay? One family. And like in any good family, you take care of each other. Nobody has material need in your family. So Jews were supposed to take care of each other financially, materially. And when you're in a world where 80% of the human beings are poor, like really poor, your solidarity with one another is really important. Like, there's going to come a day where you're going to need someone to financially provide for you. And so you make sure you're there to financially provide for somebody else. That's literally how they do life. When I have, I give to you, and I know that when you have, you'll give to me, and that's literally how we survive. So if you were someone who was abnormally wealthy, you could sort of extricate yourself from that system because you weren't going to need anybody else to provide for you. So there was no need for you to sort of throw into the pot. And tax collectors and sinners had both done that. Tax collectors actually took advantage of their own people financially. They colluded with the Romans. And sinners it's debated, but it's a formal label to some degree. So it was a group of people who they hadn't been removed or run out of the religious system. They had removed themselves. They had essentially said, yeah, I know what God's vision is for human life. I just don't have any interest in participating in that. I'm going to take my pot and I'm going to go do my own thing. So this group is, in many ways, is profoundly lost. They're missing out on what God says life is supposed to be all about. Now, the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law, that makes them angry. You know, the Bible sometimes can be really unfair to people. You read the Gospels and it sounds like Pharisees and religious leaders are just awful people and you should never ever want to be any, and they hate you if you sin, they judge you, they don't want you around. By and large, we know from rabbinical sources that that's not the way that they were. Pharisees and teachers of religious law, for the most part, these were good people. They loved God. They loved people. They believed in their religious system and culture. So it frustrated them that here are people of means who are either, at worst, actually taking materially advantage of people who are poor, or they're just removing themselves from any sense of community engagement and providing for the welfare of others. Can you appreciate their frustration? I can. Have you ever done something in your life that you knew was good and right? You knew it was the right thing to do, but it made your life harder? It caused a little suffering. You did it because it was principled. You knew it was the right thing, but it made life harder for you. And then you look at other people who could be making that choice. They could be choosing to do that, but they're not. And from your perspective, the only reason seems to be that they just want to make life easier for themselves. Come on. I've been there. That's frustrating. So you can appreciate their frustration. I can appreciate their frustration. They love God. They love people. They're bought into God's vision for how human beings are supposed to live. And then they look over at that group over there who are willfully choosing not to engage in that life. And they're going, what's up with that? Now, the mistake they make is that in their anger and their sort of religious zeal and frustration, they make the same mistake that the sinners and the tax collectors are making. The sinners and the tax collectors are refusing to help needy people. They are themselves needy for that reason. And the religious leaders, instead of coming to their aid, are sort of distancing themselves and ostracizing. So they're also not coming to the aid of someone who has need, a need that they're uniquely positioned to meet. Now, here's why I want you to, and it's important for you to make this connection between these two groups. Because it's very easy to hear these stories that Jesus tells about the shepherd with the sheep and the woman with the coins. It's easy to hear these stories and think that Jesus is telling the stories against the religious people. While all of the sinners and the tax collectors like snicker and wag their finger, ha, see, he got you. Jesus is telling these stories to everybody. Both of these groups are lost in different ways. Okay? So as Jesus tells these stories, he's telling them to everyone. And that includes you and me. So you put yourself in either category, these stories are for you. Okay? The principal characters in both of our stories, both of our parables. You know what a parable is? Parable, the Greek word means that you lay one thing down against another. So you tell a story and you use imagery that people would understand. So you lay down something that people do understand alongside something that you get the sense they don't understand so that they'll figure it out. Or if they're just hard-hearted, they won't. So Jesus is going to tell these two stories. The principal character in each story, our shepherd and our woman, are wealthy. You can't miss this. It's central. It's central to the stories. Most people in Jesus' day did not own a few sheep, let alone 100 sheep. Nor were they wealthy enough to own their own home, have disposable coins just laying around that they could misplace one, or have enough money to throw a lavish party should they find the thing that got lost. So anybody listening to Jesus' story is immediately going, okay, these principal characters are wealthy people. And that's important because everybody to whom Jesus is speaking would have been disproportionately wealthy compared to the broader population. So this is important. You probably, if you are a regular churchgoer or a regular Bible reader, you listen to these stories and instinctively you want to put God in the role of the shepherd and the woman, don't you? And you can do that. You can do that and you'll gain some really good insight from that. And parables are like, they're art. They're like poems. They're music. They don't function in one way. In fact, rabbis like Jesus would have told the same story lots of different places at lots of different contexts and would have used the same story to make different points in different times. I think Jesus wants his audience to see themselves in the role of the shepherd and the woman. So I want to put them there. I want to put you there. I'm going to put myself there. Okay? God's not the shepherd and the woman. You are. I am. They are. Now, I've known in my life a few very wealthy people. And what all of those people have in common is that they did not become incredibly wealthy without paying very close attention to what they have. They count things. Do you think, I don't think we have any shepherds in the room, do you think that you'd be able to tell the difference between 99 and 100 sheep? Do you think you'd notice if one went missing? How about if I took two handfuls of coins and just put them on the table, two piles of coins? Do you think at a quick glance you'd be able to tell the difference between 9 coins and 10 coins? See, the only way you notice that a sheep is gone in the first place, if you got 100, the only way that you realize that you have 9 coins where you actually thought you had 10 is if you're counting them. Like literally, you'd have to take a herd of 100 sheep and you'd have to organize them in groups of 5 or 10 and separate them so that at a quick glance from wherever you are on the field, you'd be able to look and go, okay, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and notice if one had gone missing. You'd have to be very deliberate and organized about your stuff. I think Jesus wants his audience to be sort of entering into this, hey, you guys are really, really good at counting your stuff. You're very good at counting your stuff. And when the sheep and the coin go missing, you notice that the shepherd and the woman both take responsibility to some degree for the losing. This is one of the problems with putting God in the shepherd and the woman role. God doesn't lose things. But people do. Sheep, I don't know a ton about sheep, but they don't wander off because they're willfully rebellious. You know, sometimes that's how we think about sin. I'll have a blog post that'll come out on Tuesday where I'll sort of expand on this. It's not a big enough category, in my opinion, for sin, is that people just, are willfully rebelling. Sheep don't wander off because they're willfully rebelling. They wander off, but they wander off because they're dumb. They wander off because they don't know what they're doing, which is why they have shepherds. Do you understand? They don't know what they're doing, which is why they have a shepherd to keep an eye on them. If a sheep wanders off, it does so under what is supposed to be the watchful eye of the shepherd. So if a sheep wanders off, it's kind of the sheep's fault, but it's also kind of the shepherd's fault. And coins don't grow legs and wander off all by themselves. This is no joke. The other day, Carrie was on the telephone, was talking to somebody. I don't know how this happened. Ryder walked up to her. He's one of these kids that he just needs to touch stuff. So Carrie's on the phone. Somehow he wanders up and he takes her ring, her wedding ring, off of her finger. And she doesn't stop him. And he just wanders off with it. And I'd have no idea that this is happening. Like 10 minutes later, I hear Carrie say to my 6-year-old son, "Hey, Ryder, what did you do with my ring? You know, that really expensive one that your dad bought me 15 years ago. You know, like the one I went into debt to pay for. Where did that ring go?" Right? And he gets that look on his face like, It's like, okay, great. Anyway, we managed to find it. Here's the point. Coins don't wander off. They get misplaced. Human beings misplace them. Put them places they don't belong and then forget about them. So both of our characters, the shepherd and the woman, when they realize that something's missing, They take responsibility for the losing. This was on my watch that this happened. And both because they care about their stuff and because they are partly responsible for the stuff getting lost, they mount this extravagant search. And it's supposed to seem extravagant to you. Right? Jesus literally looks at these people. You don't get it in the translation I read to you. It's a more direct. He looks at them and he says, who among you? Which one of you if? I mean, this is direct. He's talking to people. You would do this, right? If you lost one sheep, wouldn't you leave the 99 in the open wilderness to go find the one? And I imagine some of them would have been thinking, no, I don't think I will. I don't think so. Maybe. I mean, it seems pretty reckless, doesn't it? You leave 99 sheep you better hope you have help. You leave 99 sheep unattended to go look for one. When you get back with the one, you're going to find out you only got one. The woman, sort of like tearing her house apart and sweeping everything and cleaning every nook, and it's supposed to feel a little like overclean. These are extravagant searches. And when they prove fruitful, they find their sheep, they find their coin, they throw these lavish parties. It's supposed to be kind of over the top. What it's meant to communicate to you and what Jesus is trying to communicate to them is your stuff is so important to you that you count it and you organize it. And if for some reason something were to go missing, you go find it, you retrieve it, you bring it back, and you're so relieved. Now here's the punchline. Here's where Jesus gives the punchline. In God's economy, what matters most are not sheep and coins. What matters most are people. People, human beings who can get lost. And they can get lost in lots of different ways. They can get lost in sinner tax collector ways. They can get lost in religious leader sort of ways. But what matters most to God is not sheep and coins. It's people. Lost people being found. See, what Jesus is trying to do here is make a connection for them between the value that they place on their material possessions and the value that they place on human lives, specifically human beings living rightly with God, being provided for, being able to flourish as humans. The language that runs throughout the Hebrew Bible is a society of justice and righteousness. That God has a vision for the way that human beings are supposed to live their lives. And what ought to matter to everyone, sinners and tax collectors and religious leaders, is that everybody has a chance to live in that. So he's making this connection. It's Jesus' way of saying, okay, do you count people as much as you count your stuff? Do you count people as much as you count your stuff? Enough that you would know if someone were missing. Who's missing? Who's not here? Who's not here that ought to be here? Maybe it's a specific person. Maybe it's a representative group of people. But do you count people the way that you count your stuff? Do you care enough about people that you notice when they're missing? Do you take responsibility for the losing? So as a Christian church, ours specifically, or the church more generally, do we take responsibility for people wandering off? That it happened under our watch? That there are people who have wandered off because of me, because of how I live, because of things I've said, because of the way I've represented Jesus in the world? Am I willing to take responsibility for that? That people matter so much to me that I have to recognize that some have wandered off because I was careless, because I wasn't paying attention, because they didn't matter enough to me. And when I notice, both because they're important and because I also recognize that I'm partly liable, I mount a search. I mount an all-out, forget about it, who cares what else is going on, this is all that matters in the world kind of search. I mean, how many people who spend lots and lots of times coming to Christian churches do little or nothing to actually give up their lives in order to seek and search for people who in different ways are lost? You do know that that's like an essential part of what it means to be a Christian person. It's not, like a feature of a car that's like an add-on. You can get it or not. You can like leave it off. What it means to be a Christian person is that people care. We care about people. They matter to us. We count them. We know that they're gone, and we're out actually looking for them in our own ways. And when we find them and we bring them home, it's the thing that matters most to us in the whole world, because it's the thing that matters most to God. Money, stuff, material possessions, these things are not bad. They're not inherently bad. But what we have to recognize is that money is often used as a direct link to do what we want, to serve a particular way of thinking about human freedom. That when we have money, the more of it we have, the more of the stuff that we want to do, we think we can do, and that is often how we use it. That I know when I come into money somehow, whether it's my paycheck or it's a gift or whatever, instinctively, my first thought is to think about all the fun stuff I could do with this. I mean, there's a reason that Jesus says that love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Because this is how it works. We come into money and we think about all the stuff that we want to do, and this becomes sort of the means to an end. And that's often how we use it. So what we need is a discipline. You need a practice. You need something in your life that's going to help you, remind you, shape you into the kind of person who doesn't see money as the means to do what you want, but money as a means to do as you should. To live into a real robust Christian kind of freedom. That discipline is giving. It's pretty simple. Sometimes we call it tithing, but it's giving. If you've never heard anybody talk about giving or tithing, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, and it's not real complicated. Here's how it works. You make some money. I don't know how much money you make. You make some money. Let's say, pick a number, $50,000. The first thing you do with your money is you decide on a percentage that you're going to give away. It's the first thing that you do as a reminder to yourself that money was not given to you so that you could go do whatever you want. Money was given to you so that you can participate in a bigger, fuller, more abundant kind of life. A way of caring for human beings. So the first thing you do with the money that you've been given is you take a percentage and you decide, I'm giving it away. Now the historic baseline percentage is 10. I didn't look up the recent figures, the recent statistics. Very few people, and I mean very few people, give even close to 10% of their income away. And I'm talking Christian people. 10% is supposed to be your starting number. It's not the bar you're supposed to reach. It's like where you're supposed to begin. The actual goal is 100%. So 100% of what you have, 100% of what I have is God's. 100% of what I have has been given to me for the purpose of caring for human beings. Some of those human beings live in my home. Some of them are my friends. Some of them are you. Some of them are people I have never met and will never meet. But everything I have is for the purpose of caring for people. So the goal in my life by the time I die is that I actually think about 100% of what I have for that reason. I'm going to start with 10. Because 10 hurts a little bit. It's sacrificial enough that if it's the first thing that I do and it's substantial enough, every single time I do it, I'm being reminded. This is what money's for. This is what it's for. It's to help people. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you owning nice things and buying nice things and going and doing things you want to do, whatever. Go do all of that. But the reason that you do this first and the reason you do it at a level that is somewhat sacrificial is so that you're being shaped. You're being reminded week in and week out, month in and month out, that what you have is for the purpose of people, because people are what count. People are what matter. Now, let me just address the elephant in the room. As someone who benefits from charitable giving, I understand that this can feel like a very self-serving message, right? So let's just talk about that. If you are not in a habit right now and I'm talking about a disciplined, habitual giving. I'm not talking about someone calls you on the phone or you see something on the TV or you see somebody on the street corner and your heart goes out to them and you want to be generous. Do that too. Real generosity is that you actually organize and plan your life around giving. That's real generosity. So if you're not currently giving in any sort of like a disciplined, habitual way, my encouragement, my challenge to you would be to start. And just so I can turn off your, cynical, oh, they always talk about money at church. Don't give it here. Go give it somewhere else. I don't care where you give it. That's not the point. If you're currently a giver, meaning you engage in this habit, but you're feeling like, you know what? Maybe we're not giving at the level we ought to be giving to. Then increase your giving. Don't increase it here. Increase it somewhere else. Go find people who are helping people or you want to go help it. This is not about giving money to the church. I mean, I understand that churches abuse that, and so I get it if you're a little cynical about it. That's not what this is about. What this is about is anybody who calls themselves a member of this church is actually participating in the kind of life that God created you to have through Christ. And that's a life of generosity. It's a life of giving. There are actually 3 parables in this chapter. I read you 2 of them. The third one is about 2 lost sons. It's hard to notice if one sheep is gone, hard to notice if you're missing one coin. It isn't difficult once you've noticed they're gone to know the difference between lost and found. The one sheep that wandered off is the lost one, and the 99 who stayed are not. The one coin that got misplaced is the lost one. The 9 coins that you have are the found ones. The last story is about 2 sons. It's impossible to not notice that one son has gone missing. It, however, is very possible to misunderstand which of the sons is lost. The reality is, for most of us, and I know that this doesn't apply for everybody, but for most of us, I have more money than I could ever need or want in my life. And as long as I think about money as that which enables me to do what I want, and I use it for that primary reason, I am ironically the lost one. I'm the person who's lost. And God is someone who, regardless of your lostness, God will be there. God will sit on the front porch and wait for you to come home. Or God will leave the party and come out into the cool of the night and plead you to come in. The interesting thing is that the third story ends with sort of a cliffhanger. You don't know what the older son does. Does he come in or does he not? We don't know. We don't know how the story ends. And that's kind of how I want this message to end. I don't know how this story will end for you. Will you leave here and decide, okay, I need to start participating in God's way of life? Or will you not? What you do with what you have says something about your lostness, your foundness. We're going to finish our service this morning.